Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next episode of Data Insights Podcast. This week, we have an interesting conversation. I'm really looking forward to this. We have Nida Ansari from Indianapolis, and she's our, great one to tell data stories. I had a brief discussion, I think, during one of the conference here a month back or so. It was a great conversation. And from that day, wow, we should have you in our podcast. So welcome to this podcast, Nida.
Yeah, thank you for
And
having
we
me.
love to we love to get to know about you. I think you, based on my brief intro, you are like your supply chain, VC and technology. Wow. Go on. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, happy to. So I am currently a founding member of Hardtech Indiana,
Hardtech, Indiana. Good.
which is a committee across several organizations in Indianapolis that's working to elevate and connect founders in the state that are working on hard tech. Hard tech
Okay.
being anything that's a product or service that requires tech enablement or hard science to implement. Um, it's a hot space. I think one of the some of the areas that might be good examples are clean tech, Industry 4.0,
Mm.
anything in manufacturing that requires tech to enable medical, health tech.
Sure.
Um, Advanced materials is another good one. The committee itself consists of folks like Connexus or organizations like Connexus, like 16 Tech, like IU and Purdue. So very diverse. And then a little bit about me. Prior to doing all of this, I have been in Indianapolis for about 2 years, and before that, I spent almost 15 in manufacturing.
Wow.
Things of different kinds, right? So everything from paper-based products to injection molding, packaging, and extruded films. For 6 of those 15 years, I was based out of a plant in Kansas City, um, taking product from concept to commercialization and managing supply chain for about $75 million worth of product every year, um, managing the supply chain of it globally. So taking it from a semi-automated or a labor-intensive rather process in China or
Yeah.
Mexico, and then bringing it into the U.S. or taking it somewhere into Europe for it. So it was a lot of fun doing that, but it definitely informs the hard tech work that I do and ecosystem connecting and building work that I do now. So
So
it's
you
been
had a
exciting.
lot of supply chain familiarity there, and it's going to continue in hard tech. And then in between, you also had a little bit more on the investment side. Maybe if you could
That's right.
share a little bit
That's
about
right.
that.
Yeah. So I helped set up or bring in internally the Hard Tech Accelerator for the Heritage Group, and
Okay.
was also concurrently helping with investments. The investments that they did were specifically in clean tech, advanced materials, technology that enables all of that. So a subset of hard tech because it didn't include medical or agricultural. So I did that
Got it.
for about a year and a half.
So I think I really want to, group our discussion into three, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Supply chain. I think it's all the hot topic today. Supply chain and technology. I think technology means a lot today. Every week we are hearing some new technology, obviously robotics to blockchain to AI and chat GPT, a lot of stuff. So want to understand your thing. The third is you're probably the connecting dot between the founders who want to start something in hot tech. You have the industry experience, you have the investor experience, you have the technology experience. So I want to bring those three perspectives to our listeners here. Let's start with supply chain.
Mhm.
Maybe in the last 10 years, you said 15 years, I'm just shortening
Yeah,
to
no, that's
near, I
right.
think the last things happening in last 10 years. What's changing in supply chain? What's challenges ahead of us or opportunities ahead of us in supply
Yeah,
chain?
yeah. Lots has changed. I think at the beginning of the last 10-year time frame that we're talking about, let's say 2010 to 2014, um, a lot of the manufacturing that at least I was involved in was being handled in China because of
Okay.
the labor being more affordable. What happened in that time frame is that labor actually went up tremendously. Labor costs went up tremendously, which enabled two trends. One general trend, automation,
Yeah.
right? Because you had to take care of that labor variable. So that actually happened in China to a degree, with semi-automated equipment being put into place, but it made the US a lot more competitive again. So there then we think about, the reshoring that
Sure.
happened. So at that point in time, when manufacturing was still in China, the benefit was that, or in East Asia at large, the benefit was that it's cheaper to produce, but the downside was that there's a lead time to have it being shipped. So
Oh,
now
yeah.
you're dealing with inventory, which is also part of supply chain. So work in
Yeah.
process, right? So intermediate inventory and finished goods in inventory. You had to keep a supply of both of those.
Yeah.
Um, and then when you went back to reshoring and automation, the US became competitive again because now you've got machinery that's taken care of the labor aspect, and you've now upskilled workers, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then COVID taught us a lot, right? So what continued despite where it was being produced, there was a single source supply, which was a huge threat that people thought about. But then qualifying new suppliers is a big deal, et cetera, et cetera. So you might have had dual source, but both of those sources were in the same geography, so you haven't quite diversified, right? So if both your supply is coming from outside of the US, you are at,
Yeah.
but it's coming from the same region. Let's say it's coming from Vietnam, or it's coming, both of them are coming from two suppliers in Thailand. You've got geographic supply chain risk, right? So
Yeah.
when COVID shut everything down, that exposed us in that sense. So COVID brought to light a lot of our supply chain. And when I say I'd probably say the US's
Yes.
supply chain weaknesses.
Yeah.
And then also you have the concurrent thought of, if you okay, so if I'm not thinking about packaging, but I'm thinking about things like food, if I'm thinking about coffee, if I'm thinking about olive oil, if I'm thinking about products where I care about the traceability and how it was made,
Made. Yeah. Mm.
right? So that's also a supply chain trend that we've seen in the last few years, where people are demanding to know that
Yeah.
their products are fair trade, right? So that's what the
Yes.
third wave of coffee, right? How it came about. Now everybody wants to buy
Okay.
fair trade organic coffee. And then of course you want to make sure that the labor, that wherever it's sourced from, the labor it's fair
Labor.
labor, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So you've got that traceability and transparency trend, and with it came the data analytics overlay to your manufacturing, where you've got tech that now enables you to tell whether or not something is uh, how the product is incepted to how it ends up on shelf. Um, Another layer of it that I was aware of, like olive oil, I guess is an example that came to mind, because it's one where people really worry about whether or not it's coming from the farm that you say it is, because the farmers want to get paid for, and they don't want their brand at the end of it, or the quality at the end of it, to be diluted. I'm sure you can think
Yeah.
of other examples like that, but then putting a marker or tracer into the actual olive oil that then ends up at the end product on shelf is a way to trace that supply chain that isn't data analytics per se, right? It's a modifying
Yeah.
chemical that you've put in the olive oil. So there's tons of examples where in the last 10 years you'd say probably that it went from offshoring to onshoring. You had a series of automation, which now has led to robots and cobots. And
Yeah.
then you've got the tech layer that now allows you to see and predict and prevent issues in that manufacturing that is now automated. And moving into the future, that preventative component of tech is going to continue into the predictive component of tech, right? So that's
Yeah. It
probably
is
where I
definitely an
layered it.
exciting. So, yeah, definitely an exciting time. Like when we look at pandemic, right? Um,
Yeah.
I think when I'm meeting some of the enterprise, supply chain leaders, until or before pandemic, the supply chain was somewhat like assumed, like it's taken care. Now
That's right.
rather it's like it become a lot more critical, right?
That's
So
right.
I think they are in the limelight for obviously good and bad reason, but now people know their hard work. That without them,
Right. That's
the
right.
world cannot operate. The
Yeah, it
stores
was
cannot
almost
have
like
products,
a,
and
yeah, it was, you're right. I think it was almost like an afterthought before the pandemic, and during the
yeah,
pandemic it became critical to the
critical
execution of, right? So then that speaks to the fact that when something is an afterthought, it's running without issues. And then
without
when it
issues.
comes to the forefront, you definitely have issues, and then you come to appreciate the value of supply chain. So there's general awareness about that now. When you see empty shelves at the grocery, you got the price of eggs. Like you start thinking about things like that, and supply
Yeah,
chain has become more common in the vernacular of the average person, right?
yeah,
They're talking about
yeah.
supply chain where previously they didn't.
So now, obviously, you already touched upon some of this technology, but before I go to the technology depth on the technology, now let's bridge the technology. Like you mentioned hard tech, which
Yeah.
is again bridging this manufacturing, supply chain, and the tech, right? Why now? Is there, do you see companies right here in Indiana or Midwest are still catching up? Do you see a gap? Why now? Why you are passionate about this initiative, say hard
Yeah, so I'd say there's a gap in manufacturing at large. So
tech? Okay.
still is, right? So
Mm.
maybe you might not be, but there are folks that might be surprised but when they hear that there are still manufacturing operations that take measurements in line by hand
Oh yeah.
on a written out table or in an Excel spreadsheet, and then have
Yeah.
to manually enter it into another system, and they have to do and there is a person whose job it is to collect that data for an 8-hour shift, right?
Yes.
Question then is, okay, why wouldn't you automate something like that and upskill that person, and eliminate the need for them to walk to go get a measurement in line and then bring it back and enter the data, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'd say I've seen. So I spent a little bit of time managing the innovation at a supply chain hub and doing Industry 4.0 consulting when I lived in Atlanta.
Okay.
And we saw companies where this was the case. And we saw them frequently. So they were in every industry you might imagine, from mattresses to food to beer to food and beverage. They you name it. So if you extrapolate that into where Indiana manufacturers play, there's absolutely continuing to be a gap. Now, is there an evolution? Absolutely. So if you're manually collecting data, okay, just making sure that you have data collected automatically is a step in the evolution. So getting to Industry 4.0 isn't doesn't have to be a big jump. It doesn't have to be a shock to the system. There definitely should be change management, but
Yeah.
there is that gap. And then when you think about the conversely, to your question, why now? Think about how hard it is to separate the making of product from data. Think
Yeah.
about a time when you ordered something on Amazon and you didn't know how many stops away it was from your house,
Yeah.
right? So
Mm.
these are incremental changes in the evolution of the data and information that consumers want at their fingertips. Why not? Why it's not that far of a leap to say that should be happening in our manufacturing as well. So when you think about Indiana specifically, there's definitely an opportunity, which you see in the formation of Connexus and their Industry 4.0 efforts and the manufacturing readiness grants, in the proliferation of the cobots and robot programs, but then even in companies like yours, where there's data analytics solutions provided to companies that make stuff, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that's what I would say. Like there isn't there. I think the why now is more prolific than just in Indiana, but Indiana specifically being and wanting to continue to be the number one manufacturing state in the nation, we're uniquely positioned to continue to defend that position, but also maintain it in the sense that there are a number of startups that are based here that can help enable that a hard tech to truly have the tech part of it, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, as you said, you covered a lot of challenges on supply chain,
Mm-hmm.
and I also see there are new technologies coming. For us at Convert side, it's all about generative AI, the chat GPT kind, and we are trying to bring generative AI in the data analytics space for hard tech manufacturing supply chain companies. So, to me, if you ask me, it's all about generative AI and data analytics. But everyone I meet, if each one is really passionate about some technology, I
Mm-hmm.
want to get hear from you, and also probably you reflect your the hard tech Indiana company's view, maybe, right? What is the supply chain industry, and specifically, Nida, you are excited about this today's technology. I think we are hearing about AI everywhere. Like, what's
Yeah,
in it
sure.
for you?
That's a good question. I think uh, um, there are clear gaps between the manufacturing that we're doing today and the manufacturing we could do. And so
Okay.
when you take the current state and the desired future state, the typical any manufacturer will want more productivity, more efficiency, better output, higher yield, whatever metrics you want to KPIs you want to put against it.
Yeah.
That achievement of that metric of the future state, I believe does not happen without tech, right?
Yeah.
The question is
Yeah.
what kind of tech, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so AI, ML, all of that has been around for years. ChatGPT has made it again, like supply chain during the pandemic, has made it more conversationally uh,
Yes.
more applicable or approachable to you and I as an average when we think about us as average consumers. So when we think about the current state and the future state of manufacturing, and if it's going to be enabled by tech, the question is what kind of tech? Um, the other layer you put on that is what kind of evolution are we looking for in those manufacturing? Are we trying to take them from, okay, they're not even collecting any information, we want to try to get them to collect, they want to start collecting information to have better visibility in their production. And by the way, like supply chain is everything from when you start purchasing your raw materials to when they're delivered. So that includes logistics. I mean, it's a massive,
Massive. Yeah.
it's a very broad concept. So when you
Yeah.
think about higher efficiencies, you can approach them in your work in process inventory. You can approach it in your shipping and handling in the warehouse. You can do it in warehouse management. You can do it in yard management. You can do it in logistics, and not to mention operations. So
Yeah.
you've got it's a huge, like if you think about it as an accordion, and then you start thinking about, okay, where are my efficiencies? Where are my yield? Where is my lowest hanging fruit, or where's my win? Where are my wins going to come from? They may not. I believe you're going to be able to get it from tech,
Yeah.
implementing the right kind of tech. We've been talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning in manufacturing for years, at least in the areas you and I have been. And for us, it wasn't necessarily the way we've been talking about it, like the chat GPTs of today. It was really
Yeah.
making sure that we're implementing a self-learning mechanism in whatever the tech is in manufacturing. So if you put it that way, why wouldn't anyone want to explore something like that, right? So I
Yeah.
think for
Yeah.
us, what's in it for us is making sure that we just see it as another evolutionary period, in the sense that it's another way to gain efficiencies, productivity, output, yield, however you want to state it. But then I think there's other elements to it that might prevent someone in manufacturing from
Yeah.
implementing it. And that might be switching costs or hurdles. People are afraid of it. If you look in traditional industries, which are still requiring a lot of operators at the machines, or there's legacy, right? Like there's people that have been operating a machine for 40 years. There's tribal knowledge. They're potentially phasing out or retiring. There's succession planning. So there's still going to be the people component of it. So change management has to go hand in hand with that tech.
Absolutely. Last month I visited a manufacturing plant of one of our customers. They're not very big. They're probably like, I would say, like less than $100 million,
Mhm.
and they got raw material, like from an iron bar to they're making super cool tools. the plant, when I know the plant in maybe 10, 15 years back to today, wow, what a clean plant, and how many the robotics arms are working.
That's right.
Wow, like it's unbelievable change. Like while I was really passionate about building this generative AI, when I visited them, when wow, this robotic one arm
Yeah.
doing 10 things in that one small space,
Yeah.
like
It changes
it's
the footprint
amazing.
of the entire facility, right? Like, so
Yeah,
the plants that I worked
exactly.
in, were using AGVs, automated guided vehicles, to collect
Sure.
pallets 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And today you would call them robots. And then there was another plant that we had out of Rhode Island that was pellet to pallet, and no human touched the product.
Oh, wow.
And this was almost 10 years ago. So, there have been companies that have invested and stayed ahead of that trend, but there are plenty that haven't.
But in your context, though, do you think that technology is becoming more affordable now? When in my
Yeah.
example,
Oh,
a
yeah.
$100 million company is doing
Oh, sure.
not a
Sure.
$1 billion company,
Yeah,
right?
so the accessibility has totally changed, right? So even when you think about the prices of sensors
Mm,
that you might put in line for things like that, there was a time a few years ago when they were going down in price by 100 to 400% year over year. So
mm,
sensors in and of themselves have enabled uh, uh, people to gather information of their on their manufacturing lines in a way that they didn't used to. So you're right. I mean, there's an accessibility component of it as well. So that's made um, it a lot easier for smaller companies to implement such tech, right? So even if you
absolutely.
have a sensor that says this product is good or bad, and then triggers a mechanism that says, okay, keep going towards packaging or kick it off into the reject pile, just that used to have a person that was examining
Absolutely.
each part
Yeah.
piece that came across, right? But now if you have a sensor that can watch it from anywhere from 150 to 300 parts a minute, your productivity is you know
Yeah.
triple 10x. I mean,
Triple
like
the next now. Yeah.
yeah. And so then what's interesting to think about is, can you how creatively then can you use the footprint in your factory, right, in your
Mm,
manufacturing plant? Because if the actual footprint of these machines has gone down because of advances, because you don't need that many people around, you don't need someone to reach in to do anything anymore. You've now got this more modular system in terms of manufacturing footprint, which allows folks to have ancillary services co-located there as well. So you can start thinking and extrapolating a scenario in which you are now becoming even more creative with your business model, because where something there's a facility in Atlanta, there's a chocolate manufacturer in Atlanta,
okay.
based out of Pont City Market. They go from bean to bar in 250 square feet,
Wow.
right? Um,
Wow.
I, and is there a ton of automation? Not so much. But when you think about 250 square feet, you know what they did? They are actually based out of a market where they have a storefront. So they make the bar, they package it, wrap it up, and you can do a chocolate tasting right there. Or you can buy your bars right there. So they're actually in a market much like you might think of the Garage here in Atlanta, the Garage Food Hall. It looks
Yeah.
very similar setup. And so they're making it bean to bar in that spot. How cool, right? So when you start thinking
Yeah.
about and then you think about the consumer trend of fresh or made locally, or whatever our preferences are as a consumer, you can start to implement stuff like that. And you can increase. I mean, think about the speed now. You've got now a turnaround time that's led to just-in-time shipping, right? Just-in-time manufacturing in a way that we haven't that wasn't accessible before to small businesses. So it's not just it has a really interesting um, domino effect in the small business space and the economy of Indiana, right? So if
Yeah.
you let yourself kind of get a little creative in, okay, this tech enables me to produce faster. Does this mean I can implement a unique business model? Can I use this physical space more creatively? Can I use the data? And people are selling their data. that they're getting off of manufacturing plants, I mean, to non-competing spaces, right? So how can you, uh, what does that mean for the future of the economy in Indiana? And so when you think about
See,
the pandemic in 2022, we had 63,000 new businesses formed.
mm,
So
yeah,
that's massive
massive,
for
yeah,
given
state
the
like
state.
this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So you covered there are a lot of business challenges in hot tech manufacturing supply chain, and then you also covered the new technologies and the benefits, the productivity it could offer. Now let's come to the adoption, right?
Hmm.
Um, Adoption is probably okay, right? Not that much. So what is stopping them? Like let's talk about not large enterprise like mid-market companies. What is stopping them from adopting? Is it like resources, capital, or fear? You think there is a
Mm.
fear of AI still that
Oh
it's
yeah.
taking
Oh sure,
thing? Yeah,
sure. I think it's entirely in the positioning of it, right? Like every day, even today, there's an article about Sam Altman and
oh yeah,
OpenAI,
Congress,
right?
yeah,
Like that he's testifying that it needs to be checked.
check,
So
yeah,
I think that's
governance,
the accessibility. Yeah, it needs to be um, positioned appropriately. So when you think about manufacturing, what is the purpose of AI and what is the purpose of machine learning? To answer your question, I think it's all three. There's a little bit of fear, there's a little bit of cost and resources, and all of that, frankly, can be managed from a change management perspective.
yeah,
Who's afraid? Is it the person that's the operator that thinks they're going to lose their job, or is it the person in management that's who is the person that's driving that fear? When you think about the hurdles in terms of implementation of this, is it because it's going to cost them too much money, or is it because they are afraid it's going to give them, they're going to have to implement too much downtime in order to implement,
got
or
it.
is there something? So, by and large, if you condense all of those hesitations down, it's lack of information, so lack of awareness. So, if we then say we have to educate our customer a little bit about what this means, and say we need to educate them a little bit about what AI actually means for them, right?
Yeah,
I think it's the for them that becomes important, the machine learning for them that becomes important, and what it enables for them. Um, that's the change management piece that anyone that's selling into this space will have to continue doing, because if you think back to the automation, there were a ton of people that were afraid they were going to lose their jobs. Guess what? You still need someone to run the machines that are automated.
run the mission. Yeah.
You simply got upskilled a bit, right? So we're still going to need people. It's what capacity are you going to need them in? And there is going to be an
Mm.
upskilling piece and an education piece that's going to be interesting. When you think about Indiana, we've got Purdue, IU, Notre Dame. We've got a bunch of really really cool universities around. Um, uh, Ivy Tech. I mean, trade
Yeah.
schools, vocational schools. They're all gonna they if they I think they already have. High schools have started teaching programming, robotics, things like that. It's going to become so ubiquitous that at some point. Um, we're going to have to imagine a world where, imagine a time when you didn't have calculators. I'm dating myself a little bit, where you weren't allowed to use a calculator to do math. I
Yeah.
grew up in that time frame. It was just the educators were afraid that we wouldn't be able to do math if we
Man.
didn't do it manually, right? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So when you think about an example like that,
Mm.
that's kind of what we're in right now. It's more, and people don't like change. We as humans, we don't like change. We like stability, we like sameness, that's why all the Walmarts in the world that look the same on the inside, like there's a comfort we get from sameness. Um,
Yeah. It
and right,
brings me to remembering those multiplication, like what is
yeah,
13 by 14 to 13 by
yeah.
60. Like, wow.
Yeah, yeah. And but now the times table, like, yeah, I guess you know a lot of it by heart. I mean, you've practiced it enough. But how many times have I grabbed my phone calculator to do simple math? But
Yes.
it slow me down, or I don't know. I think it's we're just live in a different world
Yeah.
now. So
certainly.
it's different.
So you touched upon a little bit on education. I think like connecting that to the future workforce.
Hmm.
So do you think we now need to, teach more computers to, the next gen who's going to work in hard tech, not
Yeah, we should
not in
already
a
be doing
computer,
that.
not in
Yeah,
Google and Yahoo, but
yeah,
yeah.
that's right. That's right.
Mm.
So it's funny. So between my undergraduate and graduate degree, I was a high school teacher. So I taught for a year.
Oh,
Yeah, I taught
how
high
many
school.
roles you have?
Yeah, I taught,
You have supply
yeah, yeah,
chain,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
VC,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
technology.
Yeah, I taught
I
high
think we need
school
to do
chemistry.
another podcast to just for your career, I guess.
Yeah, so just like teaching students gave me a lot of empathy into that change management piece, right? So education in the US definitely has to catch up. So when you put
Mm.
us when you see any of these rankings around STEM education or education
Yeah.
in general, we're not as high as we could or should be.
Mm.
And when you think about the future, today, kids have grown up with touch screens. They
Yeah.
know how they know that the Face ID is going to unlock your toddlers. I've seen toddlers unlock their
Unlocking the
parents'
phone now.
iPhones
Yeah.
with they know that it unlocks with a Face ID and all of that stuff. So it's become so ubiquitous that I would venture to say that they should be teaching it, as young as kindergarten. You know what I mean? So like they should be
Yeah.
teaching it very, very as soon as you can, um, because it's so woven into the fabric of our lives today that can you imagine bringing up a young person now without giving them access to technology, and what a disservice if you give them access to technology without teaching them to some degree how it works, right?
Yeah.
Um, so there is, and then there is the school of thought that we're too connected, we're being watched a ton, and that you're too much screen time for kids, et cetera, et cetera. I think there is a productive, a constructive way and a productive way of approaching it for sure, that allows for
So,
creativity. So it's not just turning in, like, we're not thinking about it in purely in terms of workforce. I'm a big proponent of creativity in education. So there's a huge movement that could be and already is in some places.
see, if you, okay, so obviously the future workforce, yeah, certainly from, schools to the colleges, we need to change the way they learn the education, lot more computers and
Mm-hmm.
operation. But then think about who are still in their, under 30s, but they are in the workforce
Mm-hmm.
already. They may not have caught that technology wave, what we are seeing
Oh
now
yeah.
with AI and all those. So now the employers have a lot of responsibility to bring that education or opportunity for them, right? Are you seeing that now? Is there a need, or is employers ready for that
Some employers are. I think the larger ones have always had an educational assistance program. So if it
now?
lines up with the job that you're doing, and you feel like you found a program that will allow you to get upskilled in some way or add to your repertoire, that they are fairly open to it. But there's plenty that aren't. I think that's where you see the proliferation of things like Udemy and Coursera and Khan Academy, where adults like you or I say, okay, I'd love to get educated on a certain topic that I think could be really interesting for the work that I'm doing. And it's then an investment in myself, and it's not a college education, right? It's not a college degree, it's
Yeah,
not a college certification, but I do know enough about it, and it provides me with a certification. LinkedIn Learning is yet another one.
yeah,
So
no,
there's
yeah,
there's there's plenty of ways that folks like you or I, like if I wanted to get more educated on AI, or if I wanted to get more educated on any subject, all I have to do is type it in, and there's probably a course online for it. What that does, though, is you know, changes the future of education, right? So
yeah,
we were talking before we started recording around the future of college education, the future of young people. So if you're already in the workforce, and I've talked to a bunch, I mentor younger folks, younger professionals here in Indianapolis as well, entrepreneurs. Um, uh, there's no shortage of things or of courses that you could take. The question then is, will a future employer, not just a current one, will a future employer look at it the same way? So we're at this weird point where a college degree still matters to a degree, but but does a certification or a Coursera course matter as much as it should, right? So we're going back to the era of, all right, do you have experience in this space or do you have education in this space? And being able for it, it's going to be equally important for HR and talent managers to be educated to see experience in the way that it should be seen, right? So if I go out and take a bunch
Absolutely.
of courses in artificial intelligence and implement it at the job that I have, my next it better be on my resume, but in my next job, if I'm speaking to a course that I took on Coursera or I took it online or whatever I did, um, how how much is it actually counting for in terms of experience for that next job?
Makes sense. In fact, in our prior podcast, we were talking to a professor from University of Tennessee, and so he was like very open enough to tell us that he is not against ChatGPT, used by his students. He said to his
Oh,
students, "Feel free to use GPT, go generate it, but now understand that everyone is going to generate.
yeah,
That
that's
means
right.
everyone's content is going to be common
Similar. Yep,
unless you really apply your creativity in asking the
that's
right
right.
way." So I think he said you can't prevent this technology anymore. Rather,
That's right.
let's make our future workforce, make them ready for it and
That's right.
adapt the
Yeah,
technology, go around them.
yeah,
I think that is a level of maturity I think we all need to see with our the employers as well.
for sure.
Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think I would say he's ahead of the curve because I was just talking to a
he is.
professor who said that he had given multiple students a zero because all of their tests or their essays looked the same and they had used ChatGPT to do it. Now,
ChatGPT.
both of those ends have the same theory in mind, and that okay, if you're going to use something, you you better
Be
make sure
creative.
that
Yeah.
it's be creative or stand out. How are you going to stand out from all the other content that's out there? Or
Hmm.
all from your peers. So, like, let's say all 20 people in a class were allowed to use ChatGPT to create an essay on the future trends of AI, and they just put this. Everybody put the same prompt in. They're not learning anything. But if you're then
Yeah.
using your intelligence to say, okay, I want to do it, say it in the voice of somebody that is like this, because ChatGPT can do that. It can give you a
Yeah.
voice. It can, or I mean, that's all part of the prompt engineering side of things, where you then,
Yes.
at which point I would argue, okay, are you spending the same amount of time writing the thing or prompt engineering the thing? And at some point, you know what I mean? That delta
Yeah.
better be worth your time,
You need to
right?
probably think how to
That's
what
right.
to ask
That's right.
and
That's
word
right.
it.
So that delta has to be worth your time, and I think it will still save you quite a bit of time um, while you're still learning. I think that the professors then or teachers will then have to teach what you learn from that exercise. So now you're churning out content on a specific topic. It's already going to be spell checked and all of that for you. What are you learning from the exercise other than putting giving it to a ghostwriter, right, of ChatGPT to churn something out? What is the learn, right?
Yeah.
And that's I think where there's an opportunity in the education system. So if the professor is going to let his students or let their students use ChatGPT to generate the essay, making sure they understand what they take away from it, because that's what the educate like. So when you or I were learning calculus, okay, what is the practical application of calculus? If kids are asking that more and more on a day-to-day basis,
More and
how am
more
I
and
going
more.
to use this in the real world? So
Yeah.
if those breadcrumbs are then laid for these kids, I think that's then completely fine, right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you? So if ChatGPT is the calculator of the 80s, right?
Yeah.
Then why not? Yeah, you can't
Why not?
prevent them. Calculators are on our phones now, where previously they were $100+ devices, right?
So I think we touched upon ChatGPT, AI a little bit. You covered a little bit on data analytics, data science stuff. So the last 10 years or 5 years, there is a lot of new technology, right? From
Mm-hmm.
robots to the AI to data analytics, big data, and cloud now everywhere. Everything is cloud. It's no
That's right.
longer I need to go buy a server and all that. So what's in the card? What are you dreaming that next 5 years is going to be? 5 years is going to be a long time, I think. But what is the
Hmm.
future, you think, where the technology or technology in hard tech is going in your view? What's the future?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, so if we look back for a second, I think I read somewhere that the last 20 years of technical developments, the pace of the last 20 years
Hmm.
of technical developments is equivalent to like the last 20 centuries, right? Like
Yeah.
it's
Oh,
a
yeah, yeah. You're
magnificent
right.
amount of time. So when things are changing so fast, predictability even actually, you might think that it gets almost gets harder because things are happening so quickly that you might end up in a completely different area. So I think
Yeah.
predicting the trends uh, uh, has gotten a lot harder. But if I were to put money on something. I think for hard tech in the next 5 years, we're going to see, and you're just not going to be able to make products in that space without implementing tech. And by tech, I mean
Mm.
automation. By tech, I mean data analytics. I mean, I think Darwinism will take care of itself at that point, right? Because if you're not keeping up with those trends, you're not going to be able to do it. I think and maybe are we going to see continuation of some industries where things are handmade and locally sourced and artisan? So those things may continue to gain value because the average consumer will want um, continue to demand things like that. But I almost think there's going to be a bifurcation. There's going to be a set of
Mm.
industries where you can't see them continuing on without the implementation of tech, and then you're going to see another set of industries that almost falls into the luxury space where previously they were artisan and handmade and local, where everything is made by a person, right? So I think you're going to see
Awesome.
an interesting bifurcation there. Yeah.
It was at the time, like I think we've been talking. I think how much topics, different topics. I think you did not include your teaching experience. Otherwise, we must have focused more on that.
Yeah. It was very brief. It
uh,
was very brief.
yeah, it's like wow. I think you have a diverse, like huge amount of knowledge and experience. I love to chat more with you, maybe in the next podcast, and maybe once you are, maybe tell us next time we want to hear, like what are the fears. I think we little bit touched upon
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
are the fears, or what are the what is stopping India, not hot tech companies, stopping
Hmm.
or slowing the adoption. What should technology companies like us, maybe if you could want to briefly touch on how
Sure.
technology companies like us or the future founders who are listening to this podcast, what should we all, what's our responsibility to bring them to that? What do you think? Maybe brief, and then I like to do a podcast just on that topic maybe next time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I think it goes back to the education piece. So when you're implementing something new, so if you're going in as a provider, potential provider, there's going to be a component of education for your
Yeah.
target customer. And then the question is that a lot of founders chase is that, okay, if I'm coming up with something so new that people don't really know about it, what is my responsibility to educate this broad class of people, of which a small component might end up being an actual customer of
Buying.
mine?
Yes,
Right.
yes. Mm.
So when you think about it that way as a service provider, then that's how your coalitions around your specific area might form, where there are organizations or nonprofits that take on the onus of providing said education. And that education isn't formal, right? By education, I mean simply putting out information on LinkedIn or um, putting workshops together or come learn about us, like, or participating in conferences. I consider all of that education slash marketing, but there is an education component where somebody says, I'm not quite sure what data analytics means. What can I, how does it affect
Use
me
that.
on a day to day? So there's an
Mm.
education component and there's an education for you, right? For your
Mm.
customer, where you say, okay, I can educate one customer at a time, or I can educate a lot of people at a time. So that's where each founder then has to um, be very calculated in their approach, because then you either have a consultative approach to selling, or you have a broad brush, educate them, then sell component to selling, and that one has a more content based approach. Another is slower to scale. Another might be, I mean, so there's puts and takes to both of those approaches, but each founder might have to do, take on that burden, right?
Yeah,
Especially if you're
you're,
doing something new.
yeah, spot on. I think when we founded Conversite, 5 years back, when we were going and telling, hey, you can just talk to the data and the AI will answer. Why? Like a lot of people like can't like
Yeah.
today after like Chat GPT and all those. This is what we were like hoping for. Like the world is going to be a lot more easy, a lot more conversational. You're not going to have like zillion buttons and screens. You just ask
Mm-hmm.
natural. And some people got it. I think that's how we got into
Sure.
this 150 plus customers today, but not many, right? You're right. I
Yeah.
think we were definitely educating. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
point very well taken. I think any founder, anybody starting new idea, just your responsibility to
Yeah.
educate the market and make sure the
Absolutely.
market is aware of where the industry is going. You can't expect everyone to be like as aware of like whatever you are doing. Maybe you're passionate. Yeah,
That's right.
perfect.
Yeah, and I think
Spot
the
on.
other part of it where you say ChatGPT is now more has proliferated, you might have to educate on the misinformation, right?
Big time. Yes.
So now you're fighting a different wave where
Yeah.
the CEO of a manufacturing plant saw something on in Time magazine or in some sort of a news outlet about AI and is now misinformed or has a misperception
Yeah.
on the implementation. So you now have to stay abreast of the misinformation that's out there and have a counter to all of that. But that becomes part of your consultative selling, or it becomes part of your education against misinformation. But you have to keep abreast of both of those trends, right?
Absolutely. I think this is so far a great discussion. Love this. Like, as I said, I think we need to invite you to one more time.
Happy to do
Our
it.
audience,
Happy to do it.
our listeners is going to ask for one more. I think we'll do it. Thank you for your time. It was great chatting with
Thank you.
you. I'd love to learn more with your role, with your broader connection with hard tech and industry and technology. Love to hear more. Thank you for your
Thank you.
time today.
Thanks, Ganesh.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.